This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. Good morning, I am Carrie Saldo. It is Friday, May 22nd. I am joined here in studio by Jim Kinney, Springfield Republican newspaper reporter, Erin-Leigh Hoffman, a reporter with the Greenfield Recorder, and on the phone, Matt Szafranski from Western Mass Politics and Insight. If you have thoughts while you're listening here or checking us out on our YouTube live stream, you can email The Rundown at nepm.org. Coming up later in the show, reform work continues at the Springfield Police Department after federal oversight of the department wraps up. And in Franklin County, embracing life 350 years after the Great Falls Massacre. And the panel's thoughts on the passing of Congressman Barney Frank. A quick look at some national news before we dive into our panel's thoughts here. President Trump and the Internal Revenue Service reached a settlement which ends a $10 billion lawsuit he brought against the IRS over his leaked tax returns. Related to that, a $1.77 billion anti-weaponization fund has been established by the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice released a memo Thursday clarifying who can apply, the Trumps cannot, and why the fund was created, quoting, to hear and redress claims of Americans who suffered from lawfare and weaponization, defined as the use of government power to target them for improper and unlawful reasons. The use of government power to target them for improper and unlawful reasons.
Like storming the Capitol, improper?
Well, I sort of have a clarifying question for the DOJ here, I think, on behalf of Americans. Is there a statute of limitations? I guess we'll find out. All right. On to news from Western Mass. Students from Springfield and Holyoke are among the plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the state alleging racial segregation in Massachusetts schools. Greta Yoakum from the Springfield Republican newspaper, quoting her here. In the city's public schools, about 86% of students are Black or Latino, and most are low income. Those demographics are in stark contrast to neighboring school districts just outside the city limits in Longmeadow and Wilbraham, where the majority of students are white and less than a quarter are low income. It's one example cited in a lawsuit filed Wednesday that argues the state is violating its constitution by racially segregating school districts. Matt Szafranski there on the phone in Western Mass Politics and Insight, the editor. What's your reaction to this lawsuit? You're our attorney.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it was funny when I saw that. I was suddenly remembering, a law school class which discussed a case called Milliken, which was an attempt to do exactly this. Look beyond the political boundaries of a community, and to undermine whatever racial segregation was going on, because essentially people had moved out of, in that case it was Detroit, and moved to the suburbs, and they're like, well, then why should school districts be limited by the town line? The Supreme Court rejected that premise, but so you can't have segregation. We all know you can't have segregation within a school district, but they weren't saying, they said you can't just look beyond you can't force people to go across town lines. Now that was an attempt to litigate under the U.S. Constitution. That this case sounds similar to it, but clearly they must be focusing on the state constitution, which the Supreme Judicial Court can interpret in its own way. On a factual basis, they certainly have a point. Whether or not it has risen to a level that the justices of the Supreme Judicial Court are going to agree with them and say that the state constitution requires the breaking down of municipal boundaries or school district boundaries is a completely different question. I don't know if they're going to have the stomach to do something like that, because it would be a pretty radical change. And given how segregated some of the school districts are in urban areas of Massachusetts, it would probably prompt a massive realignment.
Well, the suit's plaintiffs, there's 9 students, 2 from Holyoke and 1 from Springfield, several community organizations also. A spokesman from the Springfield Public Schools declined to comment on the lawsuit. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education does not have the authority to change school district boundaries, is what someone told the Republican. And in response, the Department of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education said, quote, it believes that all students, no matter their income level, race, ethnicity, language, or disability, deserve schools where they are known, valued, and have the support they need to succeed, and that was Jacqueline Rice, the department spokesperson.
Is the remedy to move the kids, or is the remedy to put more money into the school districts in Holyoke and Springfield to bring those facilities and those resources up to what we have in Longmeadow and Wilbraham?
I can't speak specifically to that, Matt. Did you see that level of detail? I think it's a bit of yes and, right?
Yeah, and it might be a little bit early, but my sense is that they inevitably, I think, have to be looking at trying to either have cross-district busing or change the actual boundaries of school districts, because the idea of suing to get more money for poorer school districts, that has been done before, and that has been successful. I don't remember the exact details, but I believe that was an impetus behind the education reform that Massachusetts undertook, now 33 years ago. So I imagine they're looking for a more dramatic remedy.
Certainly this year in Governor Maura Healey's budget for the next fiscal year, she's proposed fully funding the Student Opportunity Act, which would mean more money for schools with low-income students, but that requires the legislature to authorize that. Erin-Leigh, you've been covering schools across Western Mass. It's a very busy time of year with budget cycles. School choice is something that often comes up, this idea that students can attend school outside of their district, and this has an impact. We have Longmeadow and Wilbraham, which were mentioned in this story, predominantly white school districts, very high performing when you look at DESE scores, and abutting Springfield and Holyoke. You're in the Greenfield Recorders area.
Right.
What are you hearing about school choice?
Right. So I think for what we're hearing most of the time right now, just as we're talking about budget season right now, this ends up, I think, coming from the context for our reporting, really the impact it has fiscally on these school districts and how much it's ultimately going to contribute to how the different towns who have town assessments, taxes, and everything, how that eventually will help kind of fill those gaps if there's, a lot of kids choicing out, and the schools obviously have to pay for that when that comes around, versus how many kids are you actually drawing in. So right now, at least in a couple of the districts that we cover, it sort of seems like there's kind of I think just by nature, a competition between how can we, amongst this, pool of students that, right now we're seeing a decline and we're not seeing a lot of new students coming in. Enrollments are down. The projections are showing that enrollment will continue to decline. It's really, you're fighting over the same group of students, just where are they going to be and how much money can you glean from those kids who will be coming into your district versus how much you're going to be spending when they decide to ultimately leave. And I know for the school that I cover, the Franklin County Tech School, for example, they don't offer school choice just because of their admission policies and how they operate with right now the Voc lottery system that's come in for the entire state. And some schools right now have been kind of debating on how many seats they want to even have open versus how many they want to close versus what parents are asking for and what communities are asking for in terms of, well, if I have this sixth grader who I have at this, middle school right now, but I would really like to see them to another district, 15, 20 minutes away. It's really going to depend on those seats and really the willpower, I think, of the parents to make that decision, but also how many, parents are going to go to these school district meetings when they decide the amount of open choice seats are going to be made available in the first place.
Which is very different district to district. Some
absolutely.
Take and some don't. And the dollars leave one district and go to another. And that causes a lot of complications sometimes for school budgets. Jim Kinney, back to your point earlier about exactly what they're asking for. The lawsuit calls for the state to fund magnet or regional schools, create more voluntary transfer programs, and improve transportation. Sort of next steps here, according to Greta's reporting, the lawsuit asks the court to order the state to come up with a remediation plan to address segregation in public schools. We'll have more on that as the story develops. All right, let's move on. Federal oversight of Springfield Police Department ends, but reform work continues. Matt Szafranski, you recently reported on this for Western Mass Politics and Insight. There were years of issues between the Springfield Police Department and community members, which ultimately resulted in this federal government oversight. I'm going to give you a tough job here. Can you summarize it and give us like the 60-second version of what happened?
Yeah, so basically what this years of problems at the police department and controversies were at play here. But I would say that probably the big precipitous events were the Greg Bigda incident, where he was caught on camera threatening a couple of minors that were of color. And then, of course, the incident that occurred, or I should say, to be perfectly fair, it began at Nathan Bill's Bar and Restaurant. It did not actually occur there, or the people that met there. The incident did not occur there, which created a lot of controversy in terms of the allegations of a cover-up and how internal affairs the internal investigation unit dealt with things. And this all culminated in a federal investigation that resulted in the only patterns and practices investigation, which is the Department of Justice undertook under Donald Trump's first term, which yielded a report which found the U.S. Attorney General, then Bill Barr, excoriating the Springfield Police Department, which is a remarkable thing in and of itself if anybody knows who Bill Barr is and his generally pro-police attitude, and that's underselling it.
Yeah, go ahead. No.
What was to say? And so that was, and then eventually after the transition to the Biden administration, there was an agreement put down which would order a lot of changes to the internal investigations unit. It ended the narcotics division, which became something else. And there were a lot of other changes over the course of Cheryl Clapper and then Lawrence Akers' time running the department.
Larry Akers is currently the commissioner there in Springfield. Meanwhile, last May, 3 years into that oversight, the U.S. Justice Department announced it was ending federal oversight of nearly 24 police departments accused of civil rights violations. Those efforts were meant to reform police agencies in the wake of high-profile killings: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner. Jim Kinney, the Trump administration said it's over, but thoughts on whether that was the right time for this to end in Springfield?
The police department certainly says that they've made a lot of progress. It seems remarkably quick given how long-standing the problems had been. I understand that the education has happened, the retraining has happened. We've gotten the body cameras out of this whole process.
Yeah, Springfield Mayor Dom Sarno said 4 gains, as he could see them: the body cameras you pointed to, improved internal investigations, a transition away from rogue narcotics unit that Matt Szafranski mentioned into a firearms investigation unit, and increased professional certification standards.
But now that there's nobody minding the store, do people start to slack off? That is the big question, and especially starting to slack off when it comes to record keeping and reporting the rogue officer, not letting the Greg Bigdas of the world do what they're going to do. And Greg Bigda had supporters in that building. There were people who testified on his behalf.
And he eventually retired from the Springfield Police Department. That was also a very long and convoluted process. Stephanie Barry's reporting on that whole thing has been fantastic from the Republican. But we heard from Springfield Police Superintendent Larry Akers, who I'm a bit of an acquaintance with, and he told the paper said at the press conference that regardless of federal oversight, repairing the department's relationship with all communities in Springfield was and is a top priority for him. But to your point, Jim, people are still going to be watching this as it's unfolding.
Well, I think that there's also existing in that pressure of the Trump administration clearly not wanting to do this anymore. There was a sense that they were trying to land the plane in the time that they had left. And I think one of the things that does get was notable in the final reports is the emphasis on the existence of the Post Commission, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, which didn't exist when a lot of these controversies were first erupting. So there is an interesting backstop there. It was the Post Commission's decertification of Bigda that finally got him off city payroll. So there are some differences now. Jim makes an excellent point about whether or not the record keeping can remain robust the way that it's supposed to. But there are a couple of backstops, thankfully, that didn't exist in the past.
Erin-Leigh, let's zoom out a bit. You're in the Greenfield, reporting for the Greenfield Recorder. As you're looking at police issues, what stands out for you in that area of the Commonwealth?
Sure. So we're not to my understanding currently, there are not any kind of large-scale federal oversights happening right now in terms of kind of these, joint partnerships of, large-scale reform on either of these departments right now. Most of our departments are a staff of maybe 4 to 6, where you've only got maybe 1 or 2, kind of lieutenants or sergeants and then a chief, and then maybe a handful of patrol officers. So they're much, much smaller departments. But we have seen some investigations and some controversies over the years with them. I know personally in the beat that I cover within Montague, I think sometime last year, I wrote about a personnel investigation involving the former lieutenant, and that was an ongoing issue that had some implications between a couple of the other local departments in terms of, some officers. There were allegations of an officer that, it's a really tangled mess, and I don't know how much time we have to get into it directly, but those kind of investigations...
Springfield is not alone in having its challenges,
exactly.
I think is the shorthand you're getting to.
And I think up here, the challenge that we really notice is staffing availability, and when there are things happening within the department, if there are, times of administrative leave or people coming off the departments or switching departments, whether that's, just by a personal choice or if there is something else going on and they're resigning and leaving, that tends to also become then the issue of, okay, well, who's actually going to be patrolling us? Irving just recently dealt with that, where they had all 4 of their patrol officers resign, and we're still kind of working to figure out really the nuts and bolts of that story right now as well.
To put a button on the Springfield piece, Sister Melinda Pellerin said that this is our moment to build something better, a city where dignity is not optional, it is guaranteed. More to come on this, I'm sure. And more to come here on The Rundown in Franklin County. Healing continues 350 years after the Great Falls Massacre. And what was Massachusetts Congressman Barney Frank's frank message for Democrats a few weeks before he died? We'll have that and more coming up here on The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM, streaming live on YouTube and at nepm.org. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I am Carrie Saldo, joined in studio by journalist Jim Kinney and Erin-Leigh Hoffman, and on the phone with Matt Szafranski. All right back into it here. The headline, Remembering Peskiamskid. Hundreds gather in Turner's Falls to mark the 350 years since the Great Falls Massacre. This was part of King Philip's War, also called Metacom's Resistance. The massacre took place on May 19th, 1676. Erin-Leigh Hoffman, you were there this year for the Nolembika Project's Day of Remembrance. First, give us some of the history, including maybe some of the parts that Native Americans have helped to reinsert into the story that were kind of lost through the years.
Sure, absolutely. So to kind of start, this entire event, they've been doing Day of Remembrances for many, many years now. This year was particularly important just because of the 350th anniversary and a couple of things that were all culminating at the same time that really had to do with making sure that a lot of the Northeastern tribal voices are heard in this conversation. And this especially goes back to the battlefield study that has been completed, where basically for the past 12 years, there's been this committee of intermunicipal representatives, but also tribal representatives who have been working on this archaeological project to basically tell and contextualize the history that a lot of it was just written in the history books by the victors, which were perceived...
Had been whitewashed.
Exactly.
Quite simply.
Absolutely. And this process has really been, working with a battlefield grant from the National Park Service. And what they've been able to do was go between a couple of the different towns, starting in Montague and Gill, where they were able to then kind of track some of the movement after that initial massacre between the Native Coalition tribes and the English forces, and how that battle progressed from Turner's all the way up in through Gill, then into Greenfield, and then back down toward the Deerfield River and then into Deerfield, where there were these, pockets of fighting, and all this archaeology has come together to really piece together both what has been known and what has been recollected through all these history books that were consistently whitewashed versus now having the archaeological history behind it to really tell the actual story of what happened here, which for many years did not include the tribal perspective. So the ceremony on Saturday was really designed to make sure that that perspective was front and center, that was something that I think everybody involved, especially the Nolembika Project and their organization, but also the support of the town of Montague, town of Gill, having their representatives there, really kind of showcasing how much of the work has been done to make this, couple-hour event, but really the decades worth of work behind it to get us to this point.
And really really, it was a peaceful area for fishing and trade and intertribal gathering.
Exactly.
Really, really vital part of Native American culture. And you point out that among the things that came out of this year's celebration was a deed transfer that will help facilitate the creation of a new monument. What's the idea of that?
Sure. So this is, again, one of those long-term discussions that's kind of come to fruition from talking with some folks at the Pecumtuck Valley Memorial Association, as well as an Olambika project. This monument is a relic of that whitewashed history, where it really tries to laud the actions of Captain Turner, for which the town of Montague the village of Turner's Falls is named after, and his actions with the English forces and the massacre that took place on May 19th. And now, after kind of a long time of trying to actually figure out where the deed is in the records and looking over that and having some of the agreements between the Nolambika Project and the Nolambika Project as a nonprofit does not represent one single tribe. They try to be open to kind of intertribal and really work with, around here, especially New England, kind of the northeastern tribal groups.
Many different tribes
Exactly.
involved.
And so what they're working to do now is figure out a way to counterbalance that narrative that was put up by that stone. And it's not by putting another stone up there that has some kind of things. It would much be more of like an artistic sculpture that they're going to see if they can find and have an interest in having a northeastern tribal artist come in and create something to counterbalance that.
And basically tell the Native American perspective of what happened during that massacre. Jim Kinney.
I've read, and maybe this showed up in your reporting, that King Philip's War was the bloodiest war in American history relative to population.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a really important part of this discussion of just how violent this massacre was, and as well as just how this war, we're talking about this being 350 years ago when we're also all talking about the 250th anniversary of the United States. So this is just another, important example of there are histories within this country that are not told, and voices have been consistently silenced over this. And I think this is an effort really by the Nolambika Project and its tribal partners, and as well as the municipalities, to really make sure that those voices are front and center when we're having these discussions.
I was really struck by something that Jose Ite Little Arrow Santana, who's a chairman, one of the chairmen in the Nipmuc Indian Council, said in your piece, quoting here, "What happened here was meant to end a people, but it didn't. Instead, it became part of a story that is still being written, a story of survival, a story of return, and a story of healing, and most importantly, a story of continuance."
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on. Barney Frank, liberal icon and gay rights pioneer, dies at 86. This from GBH News politics reporter Adam Riley, quoting, "Barney Frank, the liberal icon and gay rights pioneer who represented Massachusetts' 4th congressional district for more than 3 decades and was known for his intellect and acerbic wit, died Tuesday night at his home in Ogunquit, Maine. He was 86 years old and had been receiving hospice care for congestive heart failure." Matt Szafranski, Frank represented a swath of eastern Massachusetts, but he really truly was a national figure. What's top of mind for you this week?
Well, I mean, I think it was, I don't remember if it was the Times or the Globe, but they said that he and Ted Kennedy had kind of come to personify that Massachusetts liberalism that was maligned nationally, but I think was to a certain extent, well accepted and embraced within the Commonwealth itself. I mean, how many presidents came from Massachusetts? But more specifically, I mean, I think that he, kind of to a certain extent represented the fact that you could be those things. You could be that, have that acerbic wit, but also, get actual legislation done. I mean, all of the remembrances talk about the work that he put in at the beginning of the financial crisis. I mean, some people
the Dodd-Frank bill he did, yes.
Dodd-Frank bill he did with Connecticut Senator Chris Dodd. Criticize it for being, too friendly to the financial industry, and that's a fair criticism to an extent. But there's no denying the fact that it was an extremely complicated piece of legislation that had to pass, that did not necessarily have any, was not certain to pass for sure within Congress, especially after Scott Brown won the U.S. Senate seat in Massachusetts. And so, I mean, he's going to have, a legislative impact. I think a lot of people are wondering whether some of his comments he made toward the end of his life, talking about what Democrats have to do, might overshadow that. But thus far, it does seem like people are looking at the overall arc of his career as opposed to one particular part of it.
One quick addition I'll make. He told Adam Riley that he hoped that he had come out earlier. That's one part of his career that he said that he would change. To your point about some of the comments he made toward the end of his life, he did this flurry of interviews earlier this month promoting his forthcoming book, The Hard Path to Unity, Why We Must Reform the Left to Rescue Democracy. In those interviews, he was very frank. He told Adam Riley that the book starts with a simple proposition: too many mainstream liberals dropped the ball to a disastrous effect on the problem of economic inequality. They ignored it even as they exacerbated it. And quote, if you've got somebody supporting most of your agenda, don't drive them away with an unpalatable litmus test. Jim Kinney?
Unpalatable litmus test. That's going to be an interesting conversation looking at his legacy, because he came out at a time when it was largely a career ender. He was a gay married man, and not that long ago, the idea of legalized gay marriage in this country was science fiction.
And he withheld coming out because of that, the political fallout he was concerned about. There was a caveat. Frank told GBH News that he has no problem with some advocates taking stances the electorate as a whole isn't yet ready to embrace. What he rejects is those same advocates insisting that everyone else embrace their positions in the present moment, regardless of public palatability. Matt Szafranski, what do you make of that?
Well, I think that, it depends on, a lot of people understood that to be kind of him throwing trans people under the bus, which, I mean, maybe that he was just and unusually for him, not conveying his belief very well, and not necessarily to every interviewer. I'm thinking of some of the interviews he had, like with CNN and other national outlets, not so much the quote you named there, where it came across like he was trying to say, no, just put your stuff away and let's focus on where we agree.
I think he clarified that to GBH News, saying he agreed with many of the rights attached, trans rights being fortified. He was just saying specifically regarding women trans athletes being a concern that was too politically touchy for many people at this point.
Exactly, and I think that it kind of speaks to how I think he probably had the best of intentions, but it didn't necessarily come out the right way. But there is something to the idea of, like, how do we, how does total Democrats as a big tent party, agree on as much as they can and get as much done in that direction? And certainly what he's saying in terms of, like, addressing economic inequality as an existential crisis to democracy itself is not new, and the more people talking about it, the better. I guess the problem is that you always want to be careful that what you're saying is not we are leaving somebody else behind because we have too many other. Agreeing where everybody agrees and moving forward on that can't be, and leaving behind somebody that we don't agree with on one issue either. Like it can't be a double-edged sword. And I think that was some of the difficulty of him getting that message out. And maybe part of it was, just the fact that he wanted to get this message out, but he wasn't in the best of health and wasn't able to be, the 100% that he was when he left office.
Well, frank and controversial to the end. The Boston Globe reported this morning there'll be a memorial service for Barney Frank June 8th at Faneuil Hall. All right, scoops, praise, and prediction time here. I'm going to ask you to give us the inside scoop of a story that you're working on, heap some praise on a newsworthy nugget, or maybe make a prediction about the week's news. Erin-Leigh Hoffman, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so right now we're in the midst of town meeting season, town election season, so I'm just looking to give a quick shout out to some of the town clerks that we consistently work with for all of our reporting right now. It's a really busy time of year. It's a job that we have to get done, and I think it's been really valuable to have, folks who pick up the phone and give us these election results so we can get them out to people. So huge shout out to those election workers and town clerks who are doing the most right now.
Town clerks have their finger on the pulse of everything. Jim Kinney.
Prediction, going to be a busy construction season given what's going on. A lot of the long-term problem properties that we've been covering, I'm thinking the Kmart in Holyoke. I just filed something that's in today's paper on the Haberman Hardware building downtown, have changed hands, so hammers are going to start swinging.
All right, Matt Szafranski.
Praise for the Springfield City Council finally having a debate about the future of hybrid versus in-person versus virtual debates. Hopefully this is something that will spread a little bit further, because this is a state issue as well. The state has kind of been kicking the can down the road since the end of the pandemic, and there needs to be a firmer solution for everybody.
All right, quick prediction for me. Stephen Colbert will apply to the DOJ's anti-weaponization fund. You've been listening to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. Join us every Friday at 9 a.m. Make it a great one, everybody.